On November 14, 2017, in the quiet rural community of Rancho Tehama Reserve, California, morning routines were unfolding, as they always did. Located roughly 130 miles north of Sacramento, this sparsely populated area of rolling hills, oak trees, and pine forests was home to about 1,500 residents. Nearly half of them lived below the federal poverty line. It was a place where neighbors knew each other, where Mount Shasta loomed in the distance, and where an elementary school served as the heart of the community. At Rancho Tehama Elementary School, a modest building with approximately 100 students enrolled from kindergarten through 4th grade, the morning had begun like any other. Children played in the quad before classes officially started. Parents were still arriving, dropping off their youngest children for another day of learning. The school secretary, Sarah Lobdell, was at her post. Teachers were preparing their classrooms. The custodian moved through the building, performing his daily duties. Everything seemed normal. What none of them knew was that roughly a quarter-mile away, a nightmare had already begun. 44-year-old Kevin Jansen Neal had started his morning by murdering his wife, Barbara Gleason, at their home. Her body would later be discovered hidden beneath the floorboards of their house. But that was just the beginning. Neal had been spiraling for months, his mental health deteriorating rapidly. His sister would later describe how he descended into conspiracy theories, hallucinations, and delusions of grandeur. He had ongoing conflicts with neighbors, particularly Danny Elliott and Diana Steele. That morning, he killed them both. Then Neal did something that would forever haunt this small community. He stole Elliott's pickup truck and began driving through Rancho Tehama Reserve, firing randomly at vehicles, pedestrians, and homes. At one intersection, he intentionally rammed a vehicle carrying a woman and her 3 sons. He pulled alongside the driver's side and opened fire. The woman was shot 5 times, 4 bullets near her heart. She was carrying a gun herself and had a license, but Neal drove away before she could react. Desperately, she tried to flag down 4 different motorists for help. All 4 drove past her. An assistant deputy sheriff finally stopped to call an ambulance. As Neal continued his rampage, firing at random structures and people up and down the road, Sarah Lobdell heard something that would make her blood run cold. Gunshots. They were distant, but unmistakable, and they were getting closer. In that split second, Lobdell made a decision that would save countless lives. She immediately ordered the school to go into lockdown. This was not a drill. The school custodian and teachers sprang into action with a precision that came from countless practice drills. Staff members rushed to the quad where children were playing before school. They grabbed students and ushered them inside. Teachers ran to the front entrance where parents were still dropping off children, bringing everyone inside the building. The secretary hurried parents and visitors through the doors. Classrooms were sealed, doors were locked, students were moved away from windows. The entire process took seconds, but those seconds mattered. Kevin Neal crashed his stolen pickup truck through the school's front gate, ramming through the fence like it was paper. The sound of metal grinding and tearing echoed across the property. He jumped out of the vehicle, dressed in a load-bearing vest like soldiers wear, the kind with ammunition clips embedded in the chest. He was armed with a semi-automatic AR-type rifle. His intention was clear. The custodian, who had been helping shepherd children inside, heard the crash. He poked his head around the corner of the building to see what was happening. What he saw would haunt him forever. He looked directly into the eyes of the gunman. A shot rang out. The custodian dove back to safety. From the moment Sarah Lobdell heard those distant gunshots to the moment Neal's truck crashed through the gate, exactly 8 seconds had elapsed. 8 seconds, that meant the difference between a successful lockdown and a massacre. Neal walked into the school's quad, his rifle ready. He tried to access classrooms. The doors were locked. He tried again. Locked. He moved to different rooms, pulling at handles, searching for entry. Every single door was secured. Video footage would later show his growing frustration. Unable to gain access to any classroom, he stood in the quad and began firing at the building itself. Bullets tore through walls, glass shattered. In one classroom, a kindergarten teacher and her aide huddled with their students, comforting a young boy who had been struck by a bullet. They rendered first aid while keeping the other children calm and contained, showing remarkable courage under unimaginable circumstances. Neil spent approximately 6 minutes at the school, firing at walls, windows, and doors. In that short time, he discharged his weapon again and again, creating a scene of absolute terror. But he could not get inside. The lockdown held. When it became clear he couldn't access the classrooms, Neil returned to his vehicle and left, continuing his rampage back onto the streets of Rancho Tehama. Law enforcement was now in pursuit. Officers tracked Neil through the neighborhood as he continued to fire at random. He chased vehicles, he shot at homes, he created a trail of destruction spanning 7 different crime scenes. Eventually, police ran his vehicle off the road. In the final confrontation, Neil took his own life. When the shooting spree finally ended, 6 people were dead, including the gunman. 11 others had been wounded by gunfire. But at Rancho Tehama Elementary School, where 100 children had been present, only 1 student had been injured. No children were killed. The lockdown had worked. Later, Tehama County Assistant Sheriff Phil Johnston would tell reporters, "The quick action of those school officials, there is no doubt in my mind, saved countless lives." He added, "It is monumental that that school went on lockdown. I really truly believe that we would have had a horrific bloodbath in that school if Neil had been able to get inside." The school district superintendent, Richard Fitzpatrick, described the lockdown as flawless and amazingly efficient. He praised the heroic efforts of the school staff, noting that their love and kindness and selflessness and their ability to professionally do what they did defeated evil. He emphasized that having 1 student injured on campus and nothing worse happening on campus is because of the heroic actions of all members of my school staff. The secretary who heard those first gunshots and immediately initiated the lockdown, according to Fitzpatrick, made all the difference. The school secretary recognizing the threat made all the difference between 100 kids being around today and dozens being shot or killed. Those 8 seconds were critical. In the aftermath, investigators discovered that Neil's wife had likely been killed the night before, which authorities believe is what triggered his shooting spree. Neil had been under a restraining order earlier that year after assaulting a neighbor. He should not have had access to firearms, but he had manufactured at least 1 semi-automatic rifle himself and possessed illegally obtained handguns. His deteriorating mental health, combined with access to weapons and a desire for revenge, had created what his sister called a recipe for the violence that unfolded. The Rancho Tehama Elementary School closed early for Thanksgiving break and reopened on November 27th. But for the staff, students, and families who lived through that morning, life would never be the same. They had witnessed firsthand how quickly normalcy can shatter, how 8 seconds can mean the difference between life and death, and how preparation, training, and the courage of school staff can stand between a gunman and innocent children. The bullet holes remained in the walls as evidence. The shattered windows told their story, and the community of Rancho Tehama Reserve learned that in America, even the smallest, most remote schools must be ready for the unthinkable. November 30th, 2021, started as an ordinary Tuesday at Oxford High School in Oxford Township, Michigan. Located about 30 miles north of Detroit, the school served a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other. The high school, part of the Oxford Community Schools district, had approximately 1,800 students enrolled. It was the kind of place where teachers knew their students by name, where school spirit ran high, and where football games brought the whole town together. The school had security measures in place. Just weeks earlier, they had conducted an active shooter drill. They used the Alice protocol: alert, lockdown, inform, counter and evacuate, which trained staff and students in proactive strategies to evade a gunman. Every classroom door had been equipped with night lock barriers at the base, installed in 2017, 3 years before such barriers were required by Michigan law. The school had a resource officer on campus. Teachers had been trained. Students had practiced. But on that Tuesday afternoon, all the preparation in the world couldn't prevent what was about to happen. 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley was a sophomore at the school. He lived with his parents in a nearby town. To most who knew him, he seemed like a typical teenager, but beneath the surface, something had been breaking. His only friend had moved away at the end of October. The family dog had died. He was plunging into depression. He had been sending his mother disturbing texts about his mental state, claiming to see demons and ghosts in their home. He had videotaped himself torturing animals. He had sketched himself committing a school shooting and joked about it with a friend via text message. He was making Molotov cocktails. That morning, his parents had been called to the school for a meeting about disturbing drawings their son had made. The drawings depicted violence and death. School officials were concerned, but after a brief meeting, Ethan's parents left the school and he returned to class. They did not take him home. They did not check his backpack. Inside that backpack was a 9mm Sig Sauer semi-automatic handgun. His father had purchased it legally just 4 days earlier on Black Friday. It would later emerge that the gun had been intended as a Christmas present for Ethan, but the teenager had already taken possession of it. Just after 12:50 p.m., as students transitioned between classes, Ethan Crumbley emerged from a bathroom in one of the school's hallways. In his hands was the loaded handgun. What happened next would unfold in a matter of minutes, but those minutes would feel like an eternity to everyone inside the building. Heidi Allen, a 17-year-old junior, was walking through the hallway when she saw Crumbley enter the corridor. She had known him since middle school, though they were never friends, but she recognized him immediately. He was waving the gun. Allen couldn't believe what she was seeing. "I just didn't understand how somebody could do something like that," she would later testify in court. Then Crumbley opened fire. 14-year-old Hannah St. Juliana was shot in the hallway. 17-year-old Madison Baldwin was shot. 14-year-old Phoebe Arthur was shot. Other students were struck by gunfire or flying glass. Allen watched in horror as her classmates fell. "I saw Phoebe get shot. I saw her boyfriend get shot. Then I saw a group of girls get shot. Then I looked away," she recalled. The sound of gunshots echoed through the building. Students who had initially thought it might be a drill quickly realized this was real. Panic erupted. Some students ran toward exits. Others barricaded themselves in classrooms. Molly Darnell, a teacher working as an administrator that day, was in her office when she heard the lockdown announced. She rushed to lock her classroom door. As she reached for the lock, she looked through the glass panel in the door and made direct eye contact with Crumbley. He raised his gun and fired 3 shots at her. Darnell jumped to the side as bullets tore through the door. One struck her in the arm as she dove for cover. "I remember thinking in my head, 'No orange tip,'" she later testified. "I had heard previously that BB guns have an orange tip on them, so my thought was no orange tip, and that's when I jumped." Throughout the school, students and teachers were following their lockdown training. Classroom doors were locked. Furniture was pushed against doorways. Students hid under desks, in closets, in bathrooms. They turned off lights. They silenced their phones. They held their breath. In one classroom, students huddled in silence as they heard movement in the hallway outside. Then came a knock on the door. A male voice spoke. "Sheriff's office. It's safe to come out." The students hesitated. Something felt wrong. "We're not willing to take that risk right now," someone responded from inside the room. The man at the door became more insistent. "Well, come to the door and look at my badge, bro." That single word, bro, sent alarm bells ringing. "He said, bro! He said, bro!" a girl whispered urgently. The students realized this wasn't law enforcement. Without hesitation, they climbed through a window, dropping to the snowy ground outside, and ran to safety. It would later be confirmed that the man at the door was indeed not the shooter, but the students' caution potentially saved their lives. Christy Gibson Marshall, the assistant principal, was still in the hallway when the lockdown was announced. Rather than take cover, she made the decision to walk toward the sound of gunshots. "In my head, I needed to go help," she later explained. As she moved through the corridor, she encountered Crumbly in the hallway. She saw him lowering his arm from shoulder height. He had just fired at someone. She continued walking toward him, trying to reach students who might need help. 16-year-old Tate Meyer had been shot in the hallway. A student athlete beloved by his classmates, Tate was loaded into a patrol car by deputies who arrived on scene. They didn't wait for an ambulance. Every second counted. They rushed him toward the hospital. Despite desperate efforts to save him, Tate died in that patrol car. The entire shooting lasted approximately 5 minutes, but in those 5 minutes, Ethan Crumbly fired 30 rounds. 4 students, Tate Meyer, Madison Baldwin, Hannah St. Juliana, and 17-year-old Justin Schilling, who was shot in a bathroom and later died from his injuries, lost their lives. 7 others, including a teacher, were wounded. Oakland County Sheriff's deputies had been stationed at the school. When the first reports of shots fired came in at 12:51 p.m., they responded immediately. Within minutes, they had located Crumbly walking through the hallway. He still had 7 rounds remaining in his gun when deputies confronted him and took him into custody. There was no dramatic shootout. He surrendered. The deputies' quick response prevented even more deaths. As students were evacuated from the building, they were taken to a nearby Meijer grocery store where parents could pick them up. The scene was chaotic. Parents arrived frantic, desperate to find their children. Some students had fled on their own. Others were still inside, waiting to be cleared room by law enforcement. Social media was already exploding with posts about the shooting before the school district had even sent an official alert to parents. In the days and weeks following the shooting, disturbing details emerged. Rumors had been circulating among students before the shooting. Some students had stayed home that day because they felt something was wrong. Earlier that month, in a bizarre incident, someone had thrown a deer head from the school's roof into the courtyard and painted windows with red acrylic paint. School administrators had sent letters to parents assuring them there was no threat, but the anxiety had been building. Ethan Crumbly was charged as an adult with terrorism causing death, first-degree murder, assault with intent to murder, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. It was reportedly the first time in U.S. history that a terrorism charge had been filed in relation to a school shooting. In October 2022, he pleaded guilty to all charges. In December 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 24 years. In an unprecedented move, Crumbly's parents, Jennifer and James Crumbly, were also charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter for failing to secure the handgun used in the shooting. After failing to appear for their arraignment, they became the subjects of a manhunt and were eventually caught and arrested in Detroit. They were tried separately, convicted, and in April 2024, each was sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. Oxford High School reopened, but life would never be the same. Clear backpacks became mandatory. Mental health resources were expanded. The community held vigils. Survivors struggled with trauma. And the questions lingered. How could this have been prevented? What signs were missed? The students who survived that day would carry those 5 minutes with them forever. The sound of gunshots, the sight of classmates falling, the terror of not knowing if they would make it out alive, and the heartbreaking knowledge that for 4 of their friends, the lockdown training, the security measures, and the brave actions of staff hadn't been enough. December 14th, 2012 was a Friday, just 11 days before Christmas. In the small town of Newtown, Connecticut, population 27,000, located about 45 miles southwest of Hartford, the holiday season was in full swing. Decorations adorned homes. Families were planning gatherings. Children were counting down the days until winter break. At Sandy Hook Elementary School, a modest building that served students from kindergarten through 4th grade, approximately 456 children were enrolled. It was a close-knit school where teachers knew not just their students, but their families, where parents volunteered regularly, where the principal, Dawn Hochsprung, was beloved by students and staff alike. She had recently upgraded the school's security protocols, installing a new system that required all visitors to be individually admitted after visual and identification review by video monitor. The front doors were kept locked during school hours. It seemed safe. Classes had been in session for about an hour that morning. In classrooms throughout the building, young children were engaged in typical activities: math lessons, reading exercises, art projects. The morning announcements were about to be read over the loudspeaker. It was an ordinary day. 20-year-old Adam Lanza did not look out of place as he drove his mother's car through the streets of Newtown that morning. But the previous night, or perhaps early that morning, he had done something unspeakable. He had shot his mother, Nancy Lanza, 4 times with a .22 caliber rifle as she lay sleeping in her bed at their home. He had then destroyed his computer's hard drive, eliminating any evidence that might explain what he was about to do. Before leaving his house, Lanza gathered weapons his mother had legally purchased over the years. She was a gun enthusiast who owned at least a dozen firearms and often took her 2 sons to a local shooting range. Lanza selected a Bushmaster XM15E2S semi-automatic rifle, a civilian version of the military M16, along with 2 pistols, a Glock and a Sig Sauer. He loaded 10 30-round magazines. He dressed in black clothing, yellow earplugs, sunglasses, a black hat, and an olive-green utility vest. Shortly after 9:30 a.m., Lanza arrived at Sandy Hook Elementary School. The front doors were locked, as they should have been, but that didn't stop him. He simply raised his rifle and shot through the plate glass window next to the entrance, shattering it. He then climbed through the broken glass and entered the building. The sound was unmistakable. Dawn Hochsprung, the principal, was in a meeting with other staff members, including school psychologist Mary Sherlach and vice principal Natalie Hammond. They heard the distinctive crack of gunfire and the sound of breaking glass. Without hesitation, Hochsprung and Sherlach left the room to investigate. Hammond followed. What happened next would be reconstructed later through evidence and witness statements. Hochsprung and Sherlach confronted Lanza in the hallway. He shot them both, killing them almost immediately. Hammond was shot as well, but survived. The 3 educators had run toward danger, toward the sound of gunshots, trying to stop the threat. They paid for that bravery with their lives. The shooting had now been going on for less than a minute. Throughout the building, teachers heard the sounds. Some thought it might be construction work. Others thought someone had dropped something heavy. But as the sounds continued, a terrible realization began to set in. There was no code blue announcement over the intercom. There was no official lockdown order. The school secretary tried to make the call, but the chaos was unfolding too quickly. Teachers had to make split-second decisions on their own, and they did what they had been trained to do. Classroom doors were locked. Children were ushered into bathrooms and closets. Desks and bookshelves were pushed against doors. Teachers covered windows with paper. Students were told to be absolutely silent. Some teachers held the door handles, bracing their bodies against them. Others stood in front of their students, literally putting themselves between the children and danger. Lorraine Rousseau was a substitute teacher, filling in for a teacher who was out on maternity leave. She was in a classroom with 14 first graders. When Lanza entered her room, he shot and killed Rousseau and all 14 students. The children were 6 and 7 years old. None of them survived. Victoria Soto was a first-grade teacher in another classroom. When she heard the gunshots, she moved quickly to hide her students in a closet. When Lanza entered her classroom, Soto attempted to misdirect him, telling him her class was in the school's auditorium on the other side of the building. Lanza shot and killed Soto. 6 students, terrified and desperate, tried to run from their hiding place. Lanza shot them as well. Some students in that classroom survived by remaining hidden, frozen in terror, as their teacher and classmates were murdered feet away from them. Also killed were Anne-Marie Murphy, a special education aide who was found shielding a young student with her body, and Rachel Davino, a behavioral therapist. 2 other staff members were injured. The attack lasted less than 5 minutes. In that unimaginably brief window of time, Adam Lanza fired 154 rounds from his rifle. 20 children died. 6 adults died. The silence that followed was deafening. At 9:35 a.m., the first 911 call came in. Sandy Hook School. Caller is indicating she thinks someone is shooting in the building, the dispatcher reported. Law enforcement officers from multiple agencies responded. The first officer arrived on scene just 2 minutes and 41 seconds after the first radio broadcast. As police entered the building, they found Lanza dead. He had turned one of his handguns on himself, taking his own life as law enforcement approached. What they found inside the school would haunt them forever. The bodies of children and teachers, the evidence of panic, overturned desks, scattered belongings, the physical manifestation of terror, the classrooms that had become crime scenes, and the survivors, traumatized children who had witnessed horrors no one should ever see. Parents began arriving at the nearby fire station, which had been set up as a staging area. At first, there was hope, confusion, desperation. Parents frantically searched for their children among those who had been evacuated. Some found their sons and daughters safe. They held them close, tears of relief streaming down their faces. But as the hours passed, some parents waited for children who would never come. The notification process was agonizing. Families were told to wait. As more and more children were identified and reunited with their parents, the group of waiting families grew smaller. And then came the moment when officials had to tell the remaining parents that their children were gone. The firehouse became a place of unspeakable grief. In the following days, weeks and months, investigators worked to piece together what had happened and why. They examined every aspect of Adam Lanza's life. His mental health history revealed diagnoses of Asperger's syndrome, depression, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. But these conditions didn't cause what he did. The Connecticut State Attorney's Office released a detailed report that acknowledged they could find no clear motive. Lanza had acted alone. He had planned his actions, but why he targeted the school remained unclear. A report by the Office of the Child Advocate noted that Lanza's severe and deteriorating internalized mental health problems, combined with an atypical preoccupation with violence and access to deadly weapons, proved a recipe for mass murder. His mother, who had purchased the weapons legally, had been trying to help her son. She took him shooting, thinking it might be a bonding activity. She never imagined those guns would be used to kill her, and then 26 others. Questions emerged about security protocols. A lawsuit filed by families of 2 of the victims alleged that Principal Hochsprung and other officials had failed to order a code blue lockdown over the intercom as security protocols directed. The lawsuit argued that if a lockdown had been announced, teachers in the classrooms where children were killed might have had time to lock their doors and prevent Lanza from entering. The case raised painful questions about those critical seconds and whether anything could have been done differently. Sandy Hook Elementary School would never reopen. The building stood as a painful reminder of the tragedy until it was demolished in the fall of 2013. The debris was carefully disposed of, with remaining steel structures melted down. A new school was built on the same site with enhanced security features and opened in 2016. The shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School was, at the time, the second deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history after the Virginia Tech shooting. But the age of the victims made it particularly devastating. These were first graders, children who still believed in Santa Claus, who were just learning to read, whose biggest concerns should have been what to play at recess and what to ask for Christmas. The Sandy Hook shooting sparked an intense national debate about gun control, mental health services, and school safety. Multiple states implemented stricter gun legislation. Schools across the country revamped their security measures. But for the families who lost children and loved ones that day, no legislation or security upgrade could bring them back. The 20 children and 6 adults who died at Sandy Hook Elementary School became part of a tragic American reality. That schools, places that should be sanctuaries of learning and growth, have become targets. The teachers have become not just educators, but first responders and protectors. The children as young as 5 years old now participate in active shooter drills. That parents send their children to school each day with a fear that should never exist. The story of Sandy Hook is not just about what happened during those 5 minutes of terror. It's about the 26 lives cut short, about the survivors who carry trauma that will never fully heal, about a community forever changed, and about a nation forced to confront a reality it desperately wishes didn't exist. The elementary school building may be gone, rebuilt with better security, but the memory of December 14, 2012 remains. A reminder that in modern America, no place is truly safe. Not even an elementary school on a Friday morning, 11 days before Christmas.